Feel free to tune in and out as you please, I suppose. Today's reading is very interesting. It's kind of difficult. It was kind of abstract. But I think it's going to be useful moving forward because it's going to give us a language. It's going to give us a few concepts that we can utilize when we're trying to make sense of these ethical theories and then apply them to real ethical issues. Today we're going to be looking at the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. And I don't know that much about Levinas, but I find his work interesting. And because the primary target of this book is ethics, I thought it would be suitable to talk about it with y'all. Because as I said before, I think it's going to give us some tools that are going to be useful moving forward. So there was some stuff at the beginning of the reading that kind of calls back to some philosophical ideas and thinkers that had been writing prior to Levinas's time and whose ideas he draws on in this work. So I'd like to just talk about that a little bit before we talk about his stuff specifically. So primarily, Levinas is working within the philosophical fields of phenomenology and existentialism. I'm going to explain what those mean here in a moment. Big words, right? Phenomenology and existentialism. Has anybody heard of these words before? Does anybody have any idea what they might mean, or what they might be talking about, or discussing, or exploring? Well, I'll start with existentialism because I feel like that one's easier. Existentialism is the philosophical field that is primarily concerned with the big questions of human existence. Why are we here? Do we have free will? What is the human's role in the universe? Is the human special compared to other animals? How should we live if we want to live a fulfilling life? These are some of the questions that existentialism tries to answer. And it was pioneered by thinkers like Soren Kierkegaard and Jean-Paul Sartre. And Nietzsche, I would say, was also a precursor to existentialism. It is concerned primarily with the human's role in the universe. And what is it like to be a human? What unique challenges and opportunities face us as a species? And how do we rise to them? Along with existentialism, there was also a philosophical field that was being developed around the same time known as phenomenology, which is the study of phenomena. This is a term of art, as the experts like to say. A term of art is something that has a precise technical definition within the field that is being studied. When I say that phenomenology studies phenomena, what I mean is that which we receive in our experience. What appears to us? The stuff that appears to us. So I'm looking around this room, there are colors, there's light, there are things that are appearing to me. And the phenomenologists were very interested in studying not only phenomena, what appears to us, but how that might clue us into what the nature of human consciousness is. And therefore, what the nature of the universe is. Because things are appearing to us all the time. And though we try to understand what things are out there in the world, these objects that are existing independently of us, everything we know about those objects are being filtered through our senses and through our own consciousness and our own unique human subjectivity. So the phenomenologists were primarily concerned with trying to understand what is the nature of this human subjectivity, this lens by which we view everything and live in this universe? And what can that clue us into? What can we know about the universe? And then what can we do with that knowledge? Phenomenology was pioneered mostly by Merleau-Ponty and Husserl, and they were close in their aims and goals to the existentialists, primarily trying to understand what it means to be a human and what our relationship is to the cosmos. Levinas is drawing on ideas from these fields, which is one explanation for why this reading is probably really difficult. Because talking about this stuff is really tough, and it's really abstract. And it's not stuff that we really think about or reflect on all that much, right? We just kind of go about our lives, we go to our job, we go to class, we listen to our lectures, and we don't really reflect strongly, you're fine, on the basic cognitive and psychological and conscious aspects of human existence too much. But as I said in my first lecture, what philosophy is primarily trying to do is interrogate our fundamental assumptions and beliefs about things. So naturally, these kinds of movements and fields would arise as humans continue to strengthen their knowledge of themselves and the world around them and really try to understand exactly what it means to be the kind of creature that we are. In this book, specifically, Levinas seeks to describe how we experience the world and treat others due to our upbringing, culture, society, and our own unique psychology. In this book, Levinas is interested in making visible to us what our experience of reality is, what our experience of other people is, and how those experiences, what the nature of those experiences are, and the kind of fundamental perspective that we take towards ourselves and towards things that are not us. So he's asking some deep questions in this book. He's traversing these kind of deep and abstract philosophical fields. But I think he ends up producing something that is very useful, not only for these fields specifically, but also for the field of ethics. Because he's trying to develop an ethic in this work, but he's kind of starting from the ground up. We're not going to get to the ethical stuff until a little bit later in this lecture. First, we need to lay some of the groundwork for what his ideas are about how we experience the world and other people. Does anybody have any questions so far? This is all kind of general, abstract stuff. We're going to get more specific here in a moment. Okay. Well, then let's continue on. If we're going to understand how Levinas sees our initial perspective towards the outside world and other people, we need to begin by looking at, what he says about that, and then seeing how he develops an ethic from it, or a possible way forward. So the first thing that I'd like to discuss with you is how Levinas sees the human's initial experience of the world. It's probably not something that you've ever really thought about or interrogated. because it involves stepping back and reflecting on your own experience, how you see objects outside of you and how you see other people, which is something that we don't do very often. Levinas notes that each of us finds ourselves existing in a universe with what he calls alien things and elements, things that are existing independently of us and external to us. Is this marker a part of me? No, right? This thing exists independently of me and externally to me. Independently because I can throw it, it's going to be there until somebody moves it, right? I can walk out of the room, it's still going to be there. It has its own existence, its own independent existence. And it exists externally to me because this isn't in my body. This isn't a part of me. It's not a part of my consciousness. It's not a part of my foot, right? It's existing out there in the world. I'm holding it right now, but it's its own thing, right? Levinas says that our initial experience of the world is such that we find ourselves existing in a space in which there are things that are independent and external to us. Find ourselves because it's something that we just kind of come to one day, right? Think about babies, for instance. Are they thinking about, oh, that bottle exists independently and externally to me? No, they just grab the bottle and they suck on it, right? When we are existing in the worlds that we're all existing in, we're going to our jobs, we're going to class, we're caught up in everything. It's not until we begin reflecting on ourselves and what is a part of us and what is not a part of us that we find ourselves existing in a world in which there is some distance between what is me and what is not me. Right? This room is not me. You are your own thing. You're not me. We discover that. We make that discovery when we reflect on what it's like to live as a human, to interact with things, to pick things up, to eat things. However, although this is kind of the experience we come to, we discover, this understanding of the world, he says, is initially egocentric and selfish. Our initial understanding of the world is egocentric and selfish. Can anyone venture a guess as to why he thinks initially our understanding of the world is egocentric and selfish? Anybody have any ideas? Why might he say this? Yes?
Because it's in relation, everything is in relation to you as a person.
Right. So, this is a good example. How do you treat the cashier at the grocery store when you go buy groceries? Do you talk to them? Do you give them your life story? Do you ask for their life story? Do you tell them that you love them? Do you ask about their parents? How are your siblings doing? Do y'all do that? No, right? The initial stance that we take towards the world, which is something that we're kind of conditioned into, is one in which we see the world and other people as tools for our own use. Right? When you go to the grocery store, you're using the cashier to check out your groceries. Right? When you go to the gas station and you fill up your tank, you're using the nozzle for your own ends and purposes, right? You're not cuddling the nozzle and you're like, oh, I love this thing, I respect you. No, right? Initially, our understanding of the world is egocentric and selfish because we see the world primarily, or at least initially, as a space for us to use for our own ends. And the things that are existing in that space, we also use for our own ends without too much of a thought as to what that thing might want or what might be good for that thing. That is, we understand ourselves as taking precedence over the things that exist externally to us. Implicitly, we understand that there is a difference between what is me and what is not me. There is a distance between me and the things that exist outside of me. And we just kind of grow up and become used to and conditioned to using the things that are external to us rather than really thinking about what might be good for that thing in its own right. Y'all following so far? This also extends, as I kind of noted earlier, to other people. Not just the gas pump or your water bottle or your pen, whatever it is, but to other people as well. Initially, mistakenly, we see external things, including people, as objects or even extensions of ourselves. Can y'all read that right here? Can you see that? Just want to make sure the podium isn't getting in the way. So we extend this egocentric, selfish view to other people. Not only do we tend to see and treat other people as objects, but we might also presume that other people are just extensions of ourselves, which is also incorrect. What this ends up producing is a state of affairs in which we end up using other people as tools for our own ends. We don't respect their own authentic subjectivity, their own authentic individuality. We use them as tools. We see them either as objects or as what we might call an alter ego. Is this making sense? It's kind of abstract stuff, but it's going to be useful, I promise. Okay. Now let's introduce some language that we can use to make more sense of these ideas and that we can apply later on in this class. We're going to be talking about primarily a concept today that is known as the self-other relation. I'm glad you used the word relation because that is all of what we're talking about today is relations. Ethics is a field about relations and relationships. And so I think Levinas is going to be instructive for us as we move forward in the class. We can basically split everything in the universe into one of two categories. There's self and there's other. You, what you are, your own authentic self, your own authentic individuality, that is the self. Everyone has a self, right? We all have our own unique self. The thing that you are, the thing that is aware of me speaking, the thing that is taking in stimuli, the thing that thinks and acts and is in love and has emotions, that thing, that is self. Everything that's not that is other. Bless you. This marker is other to you, right? This marker is not a part of you. The laptops y'all are working on, that is other. This room, you could say, is other. This institution is other. To me, I am other to you, right? Because I'm not you. I'm something existing independently and externally to you. When we as humans are living and interacting with other people and with things that exist independently and externally to us, we come into contact with the other all the time. Whenever you turn a doorknob, you're interacting with the other. Whenever you're speaking to someone else, you're interacting with the other. Initially, we might think that the other with whom we come into contact is an alter ego. That is, someone basically like me with the same properties and views and understanding of the world. But this is mistaken, Levinas says. Does anybody know Latin? What does alter ego mean? Does anybody know? If you translate it to English, it means other or another, I. Initially, when we interact with the other, more specifically, when we interact with other people, we presume from the get-go that they are an other I. They're like me. They have the views that I have. They have the beliefs that I have. They have the same understanding and perspective of the world that I have. They have a body like me. They have a mind like me. They can do this like me, right? But this is a mistaken presumption. It's a presumption that we make too quick. fact of the matter is, all of you out there, all of you students, you are not the same as me. And I am not the same as you. Right? I know this is a really trivial thing to say, but it's something that is important to reflect on, especially if we're going to try to treat other people ethically. You have your own unique perspective and views on the world. You have your own emotions, you have your own beliefs, you have your own goals and ends that are all distinct from me and that I can't really access, right? I don't know what it's like to be you. You don't know what it's like to be anybody else in this room. We can talk about that. Here's a little foreshadowing. Levinas is going to say, language is how we respect the individuality of the other. We can talk about our experiences. We can talk about what's going on in our own heads, what we believe and what we think. But nobody has access to your mind like you do. Right? Your feeling of love is unique. It's not the same as anybody else's feeling. Not exactly, at least. It might be very similar, right? Just as your views are not going to be the exact same as anybody else, or your own ends and goals are not going to be the exact same as anybody else. You are your own being. So when we see other people and we interact with them, and we presume they're just like us, we're making a mistake. Not only are we misunderstanding the nature of reality, but this mistake ends up causing us to act in ways that harm other people. Does that make sense? John Wilde says in this introduction, "The other is far from me and other than myself, a stranger, and I cannot be sure what this strangeness may conceal." In some sense, we are all strangers to each other in this room, even though we've developed some kind of relationship. Does anybody here have a best friend in class? Yeah? You probably know a lot about your best friend, right? You know what their desires are, what their wishes are, what they like and don't like, what foods they think are tasty and what foods they don't think are tasty. But do you know everything about your best friend? Can your best friend surprise you? Absolutely, right? No matter how close we get to someone, no matter how well we know someone, there is always going to remain some distance between us and them, right? Because they're their own unique person. They have their own free will. They have their own thoughts and emotions. We can't control them. We can't fully ever know them because they are not me. Right? They are not who you are. You don't have access to their own individuality or consciousness or mind, whatever you want to call it. So no matter how well we know someone, in a sense, there is always going to be an aspect about them that is a stranger to us. Something that is unpredictable, something that is ungraspable, or not able to be fully known. If that's true about your best friend or your sibling, how much more true is it about the people that you don't really spend time with? Right? The cashier at the grocery store, the attendant at the gas station, the farmer who's farming the foods that you eat. How much more distance is there between us and those people than you and your best friend? Much more, right? And so one of Levinas's main points in this book is to really hammer home the idea that the other, that which is not you, can never be fully grasped, understood, or put in a box. What do you all think I mean when I say put in a box? Do you think I mean in prison or something? That's not what I mean. I don't mean in prison. People can be put in boxes, right, in that way. I mean something like categorized. We go through life putting things in different categories so we can better understand them and better interact with them, right? We've put this marker in the category of writing instrument. By knowing what category it's in, that helps us understand what it is and how to use it. But there's something about being human that is special compared to objects like markers or laptops or tables that can really be like understood, right? We could calculate the number of atoms in here. We could we could measure out the dimensions. We could be like, okay, we now have a full picture and understanding of what this table is and what's going to happen, when we punch it or throw it or crush it. But humans are unique in that you can't do that with another human being. You cannot fully understand them because, again, there's always that distance between you and them because they are their own person. You can't know what they're thinking all the time. You can't know what the person sitting next to you sees when they look at this thing. Right? We all agree that it's a marker, but their sensory experience is totally unique to them, right? And you can't experience that yourself. So other people can never be fully grasped or understood or completely categorized in the way that we might try to do so with objects like water bottles and televisions and markers. What do you think this implies about how we ought to treat people? If this is true, what does this imply for ethics? What does this imply for our relationships? Anybody? Yeah.
Wouldn't it be that assumptions are invalid then?
Right. Yeah, we don't want to make assumptions. Right? What else? Because they're probably going to be off the mark, right? What else? Yeah.
Staying open-minded.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask a question, but I'll just come right out and say it because I don't want to go through a whole string of questions. Fundamentally, Levinas is going to say the way that we respect everybody else's own unique personhood is that we need to use language and we need to listen to them. And we need to listen to their own unique perspectives, desires, views, if we're going to come to a better understanding of them and treat them the way that they ought to be treated. We can't do that with objects, right? We can't talk to our mug and be like, how do I get to know you better, mug? How do I respect your mugness? No. Not only are mugs probably not conscious, maybe we can talk about that later, but humans are unique in that we all have a self, we all have this personhood that cannot be reduced to the categories and beliefs and views that we have. They extend beyond those categories, beliefs, and views. People can always surprise you. Their personhood, their own unique personhood, can never be fully grasped. And so, throughout this book, what Levinas is trying to do is he's trying to answer this basic question. How can I coexist with the other and still leave his otherness intact? And not only does Levinas want to answer this question, but he makes it a point to claim that the question of ethics itself is this. The whole question that ethics is trying to answer is how can I coexist with the other and still leave his otherness intact? In other words, how can we coexist with human beings, with other people? Maybe there are persons that aren't human. Maybe there are aliens. Maybe there are intelligent animals that we might regard as persons. How can we coexist with other people and still respect their freedom, their authentic individuality, without stepping on it and trying to control them every day? That is the fundamental question of ethics, he says. And it is the question that he wrestles with in this book and attempts to provide an answer for. As I said before, Levinas's answer is language. Language is key to leaving the otherness of the other intact, for respecting people's freedoms, wishes, for respecting their own mind. But not just any language. We don't want to just run around calling people a bunch of dickheads, right? Language that is generous, open, unassuming. And which is enmeshed in conversation, which really listens to the other person. What does it mean to listen? When you're having a conversation with someone, how do you listen to them? Yeah.
Like, pay attention to like what they're really saying and not just like hearing them, like actually cognitively associating it.
So pay attention to what they're saying. Good. What else?
I feel like the biggest successful conversation comes from having an open mind. Like, listen to what they're saying, reflect on their opinions, and things of that nature.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
When listening to understand, not listening to respond?
I'm going to say intending to understand. Not merely, respond like you would if somebody slapped you across the face, right? Or if you burned yourself. You respond by lifting your hand. But actually thinking, paying attention. What else? Anything else? Yeah.
Showing interest in what they're saying.
Being interested in what they're saying? Showing interest, or how about not just showing, exercising interest, right? Because I can feign interest, right, in what you're saying, but we're not interested in that, right? When we're listening to other people, we're not interested in putting on a show. Yeah. How about this? Bracketing your ideas about them. With every conversation we have with people, we come in with certain presumptions, ideas about the other person, beliefs about what they're like. What if we don't allow those presumptions to inform the conversation? What if we just bracket them? Does that sound useful? Because listening is primarily about establishing and maintaining a certain connection, right, with the other person. The people who just respond in conversation and they don't understand, there's not really a connection there, right? There's something like a connection, like there is a connection between if I burn my hand on a stove and then I lift it up, I respond in that way. But it's not really an empathetic or an authentic connection, right? It's just a response to stimuli. We don't want to have conversations that are just responses to stimuli. I'll say bracketing assumptions. But I also want to add, if our relationships with other people really depend on listening to them, establishing an empathetic connection with them, we don't just want to remain neutral, right? This kind of language, at least this one, kind of implies with like trying to take a neutral standpoint towards the situation, right? Trying to take something like an objective view. I'm not going to let my biases color whatever. I'm going to be neutral. Levinas doesn't want us to be neutral when we interact with the other, or at least when we converse with the other. That's why this word is added, generous. Instead of just being neutral, would it be better to presume the best of the person that we're talking to? What do you think? Is that a more ethical way of going about conversing with people? Presuming the best of their intentions, of their character, of their potential, their infinite potential? I think so. So we want to engage with the other using language in a way that is generous. You can see your words as being a gift that you offer the other person in a way. He uses that kind of language in the text. It's an interesting way to think about it. We want to be open, right? We don't want to allow our categories or views or beliefs or our biases to color our understanding of the person and therefore our conversation with them. But it has to also be a conversation, right? How are you going to establish a connection with another person? How are you going to try to respect who they are if you're just doing all the talking all the time? Right? Can you ever get to know someone if you're the one who does all the talking? I don't think so. Right? So it needs to be a conversation. It needs to be such that you do some speaking, they do some speaking. And it goes back and forth, right? And, of course, we want to engage in conversations that include active listening, not just listening to respond. Because trying to fit the other into our categories, labels, or ways of understanding the world does not respect their autonomy or their personhood. Now, obviously, this comes with a caveat, which I'll talk about in a second. I want to say this is an ideal that we can aspire to. Because it's not always possible to do this, is it? If you're trying to connect and authentically listen and learn about and respect every person you meet, you would never get anything done, right? You can't have a 45-minute conversation with every person you pass on campus, right? So I would like to put forth the idea that this way of interacting and conversing with other people is an ideal. It's not always going to be practical or possible for us to do this. And in fact, we know that because we don't do it now, right? There are all people that we are using in our lives that we shouldn't be using to the extent that we're using them, probably. We don't always act ethically. We don't always respect the autonomy or the personhood of those with whom we interact. Right? So, I would like to emphasize that this is an ideal to aspire to. This is not a requirement necessarily for ethical behavior or for being a good person. But we could all move towards this a little bit closer, right? Why is it important even to do this? Does anybody have any ideas? Why is it important to try to treat people like this besides trying to be nice or besides trying to be respectful and loving? Are there any other reasons to do this? Any reasons we should want to behave like this with other people rather than just trying to be moral?
I mean, just treating someone how you would want to be treated, I guess. Just giving them the common decency that they're known as a human being, I guess.
What if I say, yeah, that's good and nice, but it's not useful to me to do that?
I mean, that's just selfish.
Is there anything useful about this?
They might be able to change your perspective on something.
Exactly. This is not only moral, Levinas thinks, it is incredibly useful. How do you learn about the world? What are you doing right now? You're sitting here, you're listening to me speak. You are engaged with the other, right? How did you learn anything as a child? Besides through your own lived experience, your parents taught you things. They had conversations with you. Your school taught you things. Your church taught you things. It is interactions with the other that not only get us to change our perspective about things, but allow us to learn about the very world that we inhabit. So not only is this moral, Levinas argues, it is also incredibly useful. The other reveals to us new ideas, new modes of perception, and modes of living this life. So when we really listen to other people, when we actually show an interest in what they have to say, when we establish a connection and we're really interacting with them, rather than the mask that they put on, the social mask that they put on when they go out, that can be incredibly beneficial to us and beneficial to them. Because insofar as the conversation is an exchange, it's an exchange of ideas. It's an exchange of perspectives. It's an exchange of categories and perceptions. The other reveals to us new ideas. Alternative modes of thinking and being. And they reveal to us how we might be living more ethically. Right? It is through our interactions with other people that we learn how we hurt and harm others and how we could be doing a better job at being a loving, moral person. Right? Every interaction you have with another person is not only an opportunity to develop your own capacities, your intellectual and your moral capacities, but it also kind of functions as a mirror, right? How the person reacts to you, what they say, how they respond, the kind of connection that is established, is itself a mirror that reflects back to you how you are acting, how you are thinking, if you pay attention to it, right? But all too often our conversations and our interactions with other people are not like that. We're not really interested in what they have to say to us. We're not really interested in discovering what the interaction reveals about who we are and where we may be lacking. But it doesn't have to be like that, right? If we attended to the people in our lives and attended to the interactions that we're having with them, that opens up for us different ways of thinking, of reflecting on our lives, and of acting that we wouldn't have thought otherwise, that wouldn't have been available to us otherwise if we hadn't interacted with them. Right? Thus, another one of the main points of the book, Levinas argues, is that interactions with the other would allow us to formulate and live out an ethic between what he calls totality and infinity, which I'm going to describe here in a second. This is a big idea. the title of the book. Levinas spends a great deal of time trying to explain to us what systems and modes of thinking and being are total and which ones are infinite. There are a lot of associations, a lot of ideas floating around, but basically you can kind of summarize these ideas as modes of thought and being that are totalizing are all about control. Modes of thought and being that are infinite are all about freedom for everyone and everything, liberation. What Levinas is trying to do is develop an ethic that goes down a middle path between these two. If you want to get political with it, what would be a system that embodies totality or is totalizing? What political systems? It even has the same word in it. Totalitarianism. What is totalitarianism? Anybody know? Anybody have an idea?
Isn't that where like they control like your thoughts, what you think, things of that?
Yeah, pretty much. It is a social political system in which the governing body exhibits control over every aspect of life, pretty much. And they normally do it through the dissemination of propaganda and violence. So this is a political dimension of what is a totalizing system. We can think of totalizing thinking. What would be an example of totalizing thinking? A way of thinking that tries to define and categorize and control everything. I don't know, maybe science might be an example, partly. Not totally, because science isn't open to new ideas, but it is trying to categorize everything and understand everything. Put everything in neat little boxes, right? Conceptual boxes. History has shown us that these socio-political systems don't work, and they're terrible for people, totalitarian systems, right? They end up producing a lot of trauma. They end up killing a lot of people. They don't respect people's freedom, which is something that we seem to value, right? For good reasons. And there are obvious ways in which, for example, the field of science is lacking, right? Not only does science not understand everything, can science understand and completely categorize everything in existence? I would say no. Science is based on making observations of the environment and doing experiments, but there are things that you can't develop experiments for. So while engaging in totalizing thinking and a totalizing society might be useful in some ways, it ain't perfect, right? Well, neither is total liberation of everyone and everything. What we might liken to infinity, as Levinas puts it. What would be the opposite socio-political system to totalitarianism? What socio-political system gets rid of government entirely? Anarchy. I'm going to write down anarchism. I think we've all had the idea that, maybe life would just be better if the government just got on everything. Dissolve it. Let people be free. Let them do what they want. Can anybody see how this might not be great for people? What's a worry? What might happen if we got rid of the government, we got rid of all of the governing bodies and institutions, got rid of the military, got rid of the police? What might happen? Chaos, right? Sheer and utter violent chaos. If anybody, if there's no government, if there is no group who has monopoly on force and violence, are you worried you might get killed or mugged or something? I might be a little worried about that. There are no laws anymore, right? Anybody can do whatever the hell they want. It could get pretty violent and brutal pretty quickly. And this is what the political philosopher Thomas Hobbes argued in his book Leviathan. We need to have a governing body because men, and by men he meant humans, being rational beings, will resort to violence to achieve their ends. They will do that. If you're away, you went to go get a coffee in an anarchic system, Hobbes would say, you better make sure you lock your doors because somebody's going to come in there and steal all your shit and kill you if you're home, maybe, if you resist. Because they need to eat and they need to live and survive just as you do. Not sure exactly what philosophical or conceptual system we might liken with the infinite attitude, but
So like for anarchism, would you say like a good example would be like The Purge? Because I'm a huge fan of all of those movies.
Yeah.
Like, would you say that was like a relatively good example?
imagine no laws every day forever. Kind of scary, right? You lock your dorm rooms at night, right? Maybe some of you don't because you trust the people that you live with. But if you were living outside on the lawn, would you be a little bit more scared of what might happen to you at night? So Levinas, in this book, is trying to develop an ethic that isn't totalizing. It isn't trying to control it, to control and understand everything and put everything in neat little boxes. And he's trying to develop an ethic that doesn't fall in the opposite camp, which says, no categories matter, everybody do what they want, no laws, no boundaries. He's trying to develop a middle path between these. Does that make sense? And what Levinas ultimately thinks is the middle path between these, using categories and systems and fields where they're useful and to get things done, while also respecting the freedom and the autonomy and the personhood of others. This is an ethic that we should be trying to follow, individually and collectively. But we can't do that unless we interact with others, unless we listen to them, unless we connect with them, unless we do our utmost to try to see the world as they do. Because as long as we tend towards either one of these political systems or these modes of thought or these attitudes towards others, not only are we going to misinterpret the world and understand the world incorrectly, we're also going to treat others like shit. Does that make sense? So, main ideas. Levinas is interested in developing an ethic that is a middle path between a totalizing system that tries to control everything, and a completely liberatory system in which there are no boundaries or categories and complete freedom. He makes us aware that our initial experience of reality is egocentric and selfish. We tend to treat other people like objects and as tools for our own personal ends, rather than respecting who they are. The language that we're going to be using moving forth to make sense of some of the ethical theories and the ethical issues that we're going to discuss is this relation of self to other. Remember, self is you, everything that's you, right? Your arm is self, your mind is self, maybe. Maybe if your arm gets cut off, it's no longer a part of you, but let's assume it's part of your body. There is you, and then there's everything else. That everything else is other, including other people. To you, the person sitting next to you is other. Your best friend is other. Your parents are other. I think these are useful concepts. These are useful terms because they neatly split up the world into two groups that are useful for the way that we experience reality and the way that we interact with other people. Insofar as this is a class about ethics, about how to live and act well and to treat other people morally, I think these concepts and this language is going to be useful. Do you all feel like you understand the reading a little bit better now? Hopefully I did an okay job. Does anybody have any questions about any of this? Or about anything else in the class? Okay. Well, before you go,